So as I said, this is top tips for the next 6 months or so that we'll be sharing with you across 10 key areas. And those tips will be in some key areas that I think will have a major impact on organisations and their people over the forthcoming period. Before we get straight into it, let's just take a couple of moments just to consider the context. I think first of all, we probably don't need too much encouragement if we were to cast our minds back and think to March 2020 and that summer of the first lockdown, when we were all at home protecting the NHS, saving lives. And for business and our people, that of course was a particularly difficult time. Many people furloughed, many people working from home, but some people of course still continuing to work as normal. And really, as we've moved out of that situation, in and out of some subsequent lockdowns, we've noticed that the world is changing. And I think, as the quote says there, in order to thrive and survive as businesses, we really must change with it. It might seem a little odd sitting here in November to have a spring-like picture of some daffodils in bloom on the screen, but I think for me that's very much how I'm feeling about the current time. It does feel as though there are some green shoots beginning to sprout. It does feel as though there are opportunities beginning to arise as we come out of lockdown's huge period of hibernation and the uncertainty that went with it. And I think certainly for lots of people's kind of current diaries, and certainly people that I've been talking to recently, people are reporting that they are incredibly busy. There's so much going on, lots of opportunities, so many things to do. And in that sense, it's driving a huge amount of optimism. So on to our top tips, all of which will be kind of put within to the context that I've just outlined. And tip number one, as you'll see here, is think about the big picture and be proactive. This is really all about, if you're thinking about success for tomorrow or just for today, do you really know what you want to achieve as an organisation? And have you got a plan for how you're going to do it? If we take the analogy in the picture here, are you just thinking about how you're going to get across that grassy field and perhaps haven't even noticed the mountain in the background yet? Or have you already planned the route across the field, the best route up the mountain, and actually what's facing you on the other side? I think we all really have no choice in terms of being able to react to what's in front of us, but being proactive is really a consequence of having thought about the bigger picture, and it's about making a conscious decision to invest time and effort now to make things better in the future. It's what I often refer to as a pay now or pay later strategy. We can pay now by putting the time and effort into giving the future that kind of serious thought and investment, or we can pay later by simply being in a position of having to react to it at a future time. So, quite clearly the details of running your organisation day to day are vitally important, but if you don't have a vision for where you're heading, you actually have no idea of if you're travelling in the right direction and if all of your detailed actions are worth it. So the vision really provides your organisation with a compass to check its direction of travel. And this can be really useful if you're faced with a key decision, for example, investment, diversification, a new business opportunity, or even if you're just simply thinking about choices of prioritization. If you have that clear vision and that clear sense of direction of travel, it gives you a filter that you can consider those things against. Does the new opportunity, does the investment support what you're actually aiming to achieve? or does it take you in a slightly different direction? If it does, that might be okay, but it does cause you to stop and think about why you're doing it. So in order to be proactive in realizing your vision, of course, you'll need to formulate a plan of action designed to achieve your business goals. From an HR perspective, we're always most interested in how will you ensure your workforce is aligned to these objectives, and is everybody pulling in the same direction? This is often outlined in a people or an HR strategy, which in its simplest form, we think can be summed up in just 6 words, which is get them, keep them, and use them. In other words, a people strategy encapsulates the set of practices that determine how you attract, how you retain, how you grow, and how you utilize your employees in order to best accomplish your vision and your company's mission. So ultimately, the aim of the people strategy is to ensure your team is set up for success. So thinking big picture and being proactive does require some action. You'll need to create the vision, you'll need to formulate your plan, and you need to take your people with you on that journey. At Petaurum, we have our own proactive style of HR too, which is based on our 3 Ps philosophy of preventing people problems. So really very much in line with this top tip, we fundamentally believe in setting up teams for success. We do that by providing straightforward HR advice and support, and by ensuring that the right foundations are in place. That way we can take a much more proactive approach to HR, and hopefully by solving or preventing problems from arising before they've even occurred. So if you're interested, we have written a blog around this subject, which is based on the theme, or based on the tale rather, of the dripping tap. So a little bit of post webinar reading if you would like to take a look at that. So our next tip is to update risk assessments and business continuity plans. And I appreciate this perhaps sounds a little bit boring as a top tip, but I think if we've learnt anything from the past 18 months, it's that change really is the only constant in life. And that might be a bit of a corny statement, but I think it's very true. And the world that we live in today is indeed VUCA. If you're not familiar with the VUCA acronym, it's up there on the screen for you. It's about volatile. So the world around us today is unpredictable. There are lots of things that are outside of our control. It's uncertain. We can't always be clear that the action we're proposing to take has certainty in terms of outcome. Complexity, is there around the dynamic environment and the very many dependencies that exist. And of course, all of this brings ambiguity. It's an unfamiliar environment, and often requiring us to move into areas outside of our expertise. So the purpose in terms of assessing and mitigating risk and looking at business continuity planning is really all about flattening bumps into the road. Think back to the 23rd of March 2020 when the first lockdown was announced. And you might argue that, of course, nobody could have predicted that was going to happen. But with some degree of pre-thinking and planning in place, I'm sure that would have made life an awful lot easier. So in terms of where we are now, have you reflected within your organisation and within your area of responsibility on the lessons learnt over the last 18 months? And have you answered all those really tricky, really potentially difficult what-if questions? How do you create more stability in an unstable world within your organisation? And how do you increase business and personal resilience? I think the one thing for me around risk assessment and business continuity planning is involve your team in this exercise. This shouldn't be a lone thought process. You won't have all the information and certainly won't have all the answers or the ideas. So actually involve your team in that process, and in that way you'll get a much more rounded response and a much more resilient plan. But what are some of the specific HR risks that might be prevalent over the next 6 months or so? So here's a few, really, just to get your thinking going. You might think about how you would cope with either an upturn or a downturn in business, and the impact that might have, particularly on your people. However unlikely you might think it's going to be, how would you respond to another lockdown? How are you giving confidence to your current team members that the workplace is safe? As things perhaps start to reopen and the markets return to some form of normality, how are you proposing to attract and retain the most talented people into your team? That really is an essential feature of retaining your competitive advantage. You've probably already had to think about how you're managing staff absences caused by isolation, how you're handling accrued holiday entitlements, and also how you're managing things like statutory flexible working requests. So there are lots of things coming to the fore, coming to the top of the HR agenda that may not have been quite so normal in the past. And it's very much worth investing some time into thinking about your approach, thinking about your strategy and your plan to these things, because of course it's going to be really important to maintain a consistent response. So top tip number 3 is to design your approach to hybrid working. Does hybrid working meet the needs of your business, and does it meet the needs of your people? There was a recent survey that said 78% of employees indicated a preference for working from home, at least occasionally post-COVID, and that research was undertaken by Eurofound. Hybrid working from home may or may not be possible in your organisation, but have you really thought about it? And people often think of hybrid working simply as the picture suggests there, in terms of location. Do you work at home or do you work in the office or in the workplace? But the reality is it's really much more complex than that. Location, of course, is the obvious and quite a primary issue. In addition to home or office working, you may have people that are working on a mobile basis. They may be working at hot desks or actually at a non-permanent office hub. But other forms of hybrid do exist. So think about working pattern. Do people need to work full-time remotely or full-time at work? Could it be part-time in each location? Might it vary based on different roles or teams? Could there be some kind of a schedule? Could there be an opportunity perhaps to think about different parts of the day when people might be able to actually do their work? Maybe the old traditional 9 to 5 or whatever your standard hours might be may not be suitable for the business's future direction post-COVID, and may not actually suit all of your team members either. So think about those working patterns. Also think about timeframes. Again, it doesn't need to be a standard approach throughout the whole year. You might have different arrangements over a working week or a working month, or indeed there might be a seasonal requirement where different types of working arrangement are necessary. Physical proximity is, of course, a major issue with this, and if an individual role needs interaction with others in real time, then of course that has to be factored in to the working arrangement. But don't just think about hybrid working on that simple level of home or indeed office space. Of course, Hybrid working is all about balancing the upsides with the possible challenges. I've just put a few thoughts there on the screen in terms of what some of those upsides and possible challenges might be, which of course depend really depending on which stakeholder viewpoint you're looking at this from. And that, of course, is the other key factor here. Different people will have different views about what's important. So in terms of thinking about hybrid working, do look at it from all of your different stakeholders, whether that's the business, the employees, or indeed your customers. Top tip number 4 is to create a resource plan. And put simply, a resource plan is all about getting the right number of people with the right skills employed in the right place at the right time. If you can get them at the right cost and on the right employment contracts too, that really will help to deliver your organisation's short and longer term objectives. In terms of how you might put together a resource plan, there are really 4 key steps there. First one is to analyse your workforce. So how much does it cost at the moment? What skills do they possess? What outcomes do they deliver? What are you paying? Is that market rate? Is it above or below the market rate? Once you've pulled all of that information together, then think about the future. Are there any big changes coming? These may be self-imposed changes, or they may be otherwise imposed on you from an external source. Are you expanding or contracting as a business? What's your sickness level been like in the past, and is that likely to project at a similar rate going forwards? Have you got any resignations to factor in? Have you got flight risk on some key people? Or are there a number of people who you think may be retiring over the next year? What is your employee turnover rate, and what impact does that have on your resourcing requirements? So once you've got both of those pieces of thinking in place, you can then do your gap analysis and identify what those gaps are. First of all, actually, is there a skills gap? Do you have a surplus or a deficit in numbers? You might think about location. Is your requirement for people in one location diminishing, but actually increasing in another location? Do you need the team to be available at different times of the day or the week? Is the pay strategy that you previously adopted still meeting your requirements, or do you need to reconsider? You might think about different approaches to that. You might consider whether you adopt a grow our own strategy, so you're developing your own talent. You might decide, actually, we need to hire in talented people who are able to hit the ground running and deliver, but those talented people will probably demand top-end wages. You might find that there's a skills shortage where demand is outstripping supply, and again, it's prevalent already in certain industries in the UK. We've seen that with HGV drivers recently. We've seen it in certain parts of the food economy, and of course in healthcare, particularly nursing and other clinical professions. We've had a skills shortage for some considerable time. And then it's really about finding the solution. Is the solution about more recruitment? Is it about training or retraining your people? Is it about getting greater flexibility from your existing people, redundancy, or maybe managing those changes through natural wastage and turnover? It's really important to do the analysis and the fact finding first, and then you can really be focused in terms of designing the right solution that is going to meet your future resourcing requirements. So the next tip, really following on from the creation of a resource plan is to think about your recruitment and retention plan. There's been an awful lot in the press recently about the Great Resignation. And the question here is, are you prepared? Again, some recent surveys have suggested that 69% of UK workers would be happy to change their job in the next few months, and 24% are actively planning to move. This is from a stat in the USA. In August this year, 4.3 million American employees resigned from their roles, beating the previous record set in April this year. But in the UK, as I've already said, we've got some parts of the workforce, HGV drivers and similar, where the staffing crisis is deepening. More than a quarter of firms who were recently surveyed back in October said a lack of staff was affecting their ability to operate. So getting a recruitment and retention plan in place is a really, really key factor. But how might you go about this at a practical level? Well, here are a number of steps that we think you might want to think about. And first of all is thinking about the basics. Are you paying a reasonable living wage? Do you provide working conditions that are safe and healthy, and hours that are humane and people can cope with? Most people want work to provide them with enough money and enough time to live, and this applies across the whole employment spectrum. I think if you're unable to answer yes to some of those basic questions, then recruitment and retention is potentially always going to be a challenge and potentially a bit of a merry-go-round in terms of people coming and going. If you are able to satisfy those basic requirements, think about flexibility, but don't just think about it, be flexible, don't just say you are. A good example here is from a recent survey by the TUC, which last month revealed that 50% of mothers who had requested flexible working had been at least partly refused. That's half of those asking for the ability to meet their caring responsibilities being told that it isn't possible. In a way, this is entry-level stuff. If you don't let people look after their loved ones, they either won't want to or indeed won't be able to work for you. It's not always possible to be entirely flexible, but it's often possible to work something out and achieve some level of compromise. So being flexible and working with your people is a really good element of any retention strategy. Think about some of the old school perks as well. It's not just about having a quality pension scheme in place, which everybody will do now, but think about other benefits that people will value, whether they're health benefits, extra annual leave, things like a cycle to work scheme or childcare vouchers, or the provision of a benefits platform that provides discounts, deals and special offers. But there are lots of new generation perks, and to be fair, some of these are not necessarily so new these days. Things like providing free food, free fruit and drinks in the workplace has become more and more common, as the wellbeing agenda has progressed. But think about hybrid working. Go back to what we were saying earlier. The ability for people to work from home can be a really appealing factor from a recruitment and retention perspective. You might also think about providing some kind of a hybrid working allowance that enables people to be properly kitted out when working from home, and potentially to cover off some of their additional costs that they might incur whilst working from home. There are other types of new generation perks that some employers are thinking about. Work concierge services are getting more and more popular. So this is the type of service that takes away tedious life admin from people. So maybe tracking down cheap insurance or an emergency plumber, Bring your pet to work day or bring your pet to work is another perk that's certainly got more and more popular over lockdown, particularly as dog ownership has soared over the past year. Giving people their birthday off, making arrangements for people to have their cars cleaned or valeted at the workplace. It's really about creating something unique for your organisation that people will really value. You know, that's the type of perk that can have a really dramatic effect and stand you apart from your competitors. From a recruitment perspective, it's good to have an always-on approach to recruitment. So, you know, this isn't just about treating your existing employees with the kind of attention that you give to hiring new staff, but it's about having that constant thought process about how and where you're going to bring your next person in. Now, if you truly understand your resource plan, if you truly understand, you know, how and when and why people leave, you'll be able to be more proactive in this sense, and you'll certainly be able to have that always-on approach to recruitment. Start to create some pools of potential candidates that you can keep warm, start a dialogue with, and certainly help to reduce the timeline in terms of bringing those people in as and when you need them. I think finally there, also think about the human connection. So this is really about your organisational purpose and values. You know, against a backdrop of Microsoft and Facebook announcing, you know, their metaverse and their mesh service and offering AI-enabled immersive meetings with 3D avatars, you know, actually it's fantastic from a technical perspective, but it probably lacks something in terms of human connection, and we think that's often for many people the real draw to work. You know, so certainly many of my happy memories from past career, you know, are those moments of whether it's collective hysteria or gossip or maybe just a bit of daftness, you know, where you're sharing stories and sharing experiences with people in the workplace, you know, where you have those opportunities to bond, to get together and deliver really great stuff with your colleagues. You know, it's a good opportunity to think about how you would describe your organisation, but also how would your employees describe it, and is there a gap in that? The good thing about recruitment and selection is it's actually quite easy to measure. So collecting data and measuring in this area is entirely possible. Monitor and review that data, use it to inform your approach going forwards, you know, but also make sure that you've got some of the quantitative data from things like exit interviews in there as well, because that will certainly add more richness to your approach. Top tip number 6 is to train your managers. So think about what training your leaders and managers might need to cope with the new world that we're living in. Do they have the skills needed now, next year and beyond? And I think that it's fair to say that lots of people have attended many different management development training courses over the past few years, but so much of that is founded on research and principles from last century. So if we stop and think about how life and business has revolutionized over that time, you know, technology, pace of change, etc., it's really no wonder that the old world approach to management and leadership isn't necessarily working today. As Maslow famously said, people who are only good with a hammer will actually start to see every problem as a nail. And the challenge and opportunity for managers and leaders in the new world is to be much more flexible and much more adaptable than that. So what do I mean by New World leadership? Well, there are 7 timeless leadership principles that will stand the rigor and challenge of the new VUCA world that we're living in today. So the first of those is that the modern managers and leaders understand themselves and have a story to tell. They build on their strengths. They're happy to be vulnerable. They are themselves at work. They share their leadership approach openly. They build trust. They're positive. They're energetic, and they're happy. They inspire action. So they put the purpose of the organisation at the heart of everything they do, and they make a difference in terms of delivering that. They're courageous. They go out on a limb, and they give examples that give real meaning to what they want to achieve, so that they inspire action and create a real sense of value. The modern leaders always create high performance teams around them. So, this isn't about them. This isn't about leading from the front. Leadership can come from anywhere in the modern world. And the modern leader and modern manager are comfortable with collaboration, with empowerment, but also with autonomy, and they know how to build teams quickly. Innovation is also critical in the new world, and the modern leader will create a culture where everyone is empowered to come up with great ideas to improve performance and add value. They manage ambiguity and kill risk. So think about what we were saying on top tip 2. But the modern managers will really make the complex simple. They will understand the need for evolving plans, but being agile with those plans. They're mentally tough and resilient to deal with a world in perpetual change. They also help educate others around them. So they inspire curiosity, and they only tell other people what to do when direction is absolutely needed. So they will lead with questions, they'll have a coaching style, and they'll develop and nurture the people in their teams. And the final thing here is about delivering with pace. So it's about translating that strategy into action, joining the dots, and delivering through their people and through their teams in order to execute. It's about agility, really. And as I said, if all you've got is that hammer, everything will look like a nail. But this is really about having a different set of tools in your tool bag. As I said earlier, leadership doesn't always come from the top. But I think be aware that this style might not be comfortable for everyone. Having a senior rank and longevity in a role doesn't necessarily mean that you will automatically possess all of these skills and have the ability to act in this way. And hence why top tip number 6 is really about thinking whether your managers and leaders have been trained to cope with the new world that we're living in. So top tip number 7 is to think about culture and engaging your team. So there are lots of definitions of employee engagement, but the one that I like the best is that when somebody has the skills to leave, but the desire to stay, for me, that is at the very heart of an engaged employee. So how will you harness your workforce to create a positive culture? And there's lots and lots of research out there in terms of the benefits of creating positive culture and creating an engaged workforce, around things like increased profit, improved customer relationships, enhanced well-being, which we'll be coming on to later, reducing absence levels, improved recruitment and retention, and also an improved approach to health and safety. There are some really, really tangible benefits around this topic, which make it really worth doing. So on a practical level, how might you go about addressing it? So I think a simple tool to use is the Engage for Success model of employee engagement. The link to the Engage for Success website is on the screen there, but they've got a four enabler model to employee engagement. And first of all, it's about visible, empowering leaders who can share a strong story about where the organisation has come from and where it's going to. So think about big picture and think about what we were saying earlier in terms of the modern leader. So these leaders are authentic, they're compelling, and they allow their teams to play their part in delivering your organisation's purpose. It's also about engaging managers who better focus their team members. They give them scope, they coach them, they stretch them, and they treat them as individuals. Allowing employees a voice to reinforce and challenge views is really important in terms of creating an engaging team. Doing this acknowledges employees as central to solving your business challenges and driving innovation. And to be honest, it's the best organisational smoke alarm that you can have. Employees will have a view. The question is, do you allow them the voice to share that with you? And then the fourth enabler is about organisational integrity. So this is about making sure that the values on the wall are reflected in the day-to-day behaviours of everybody in the business at all levels. There's no say-do gap anywhere, so that we say one thing but behave in another way. And in that way, it's about building trust. It's about challenging toxic behaviours in an organisation so that actually those values really do get embedded and really are lived and breathed throughout the entire organisation. And this, if you think about perhaps organisations that you've worked in the past, where these enablers weren't in existence, and if you stop and think about it, you could probably easily identify the fact that probably not everybody was pulling together. It wasn't a cohesive team, wasn't a high-performing team, and probably wasn't a really enjoyable culture to work in. So think about these four enablers, and using this type of simple model will really help to drive that positive culture in your business. So tip number 8 is about factoring health, well-being and resilience into your thinking. This isn't pink and fluffy HR by any sense of the imagination. We like to use a really simple formula at Petaurum, which is that engagement plus well-being equals performance. It's about removing the barriers from an individual to be able to bring the best version of themselves to work and perform consistently well. So if an individual is fit and well, if their mental health and well-being is positive, if they have no financial concerns and they're engaged with your organisational purpose, then you will inevitably be removing barriers to poor performance. Mental health in particular and well-being has certainly shot up the agenda over the past year or so. And I'm pleased to say it is part of the regular dialogue in today's workplace. But that's not to say that all employees feel particularly comfortable in speaking up about poor mental health. And this is probably unlikely to change in the near future. So as employers, we'll need to adopt a range of measures to support employees, particularly those experiencing poor mental health, in order to get them to the right place where they can deliver to their best in the organisation. So that might be a range of measures from supporting them to regain an effective work-life balance, addressing fears about COVID or health, right through to support for more severe mental health conditions. It's really about addressing fears and anxieties, maintaining work-life balance, and above all, helping people to build resilience. So what we want to see is more of this, so more energy, more vitality, better engagement, increased confidence, more consistent performance, and less of this, stress, conflict, burnout, anxiety, arguing, confusion, are not good traits for people to bring to work if they are to perform at their best. On a practical level, stress the importance of resilience, and that absolutely has a key impact on mental health and well-being. And I think as leaders, it's important for us to ensure that we build and maintain our own resilience. After all, if we don't look after ourselves, how can we possibly look after others? So here on the screen is a really simple model that gives some helpful tips based on 6 pillars of resilience. And credit to Graham Wilson from Success Factory for this visual. But again, what you will see is that it pulls and draws on some of the themes that we've already talked about. So, having a clear vision, being certain about your purpose and goals, and ensuring that you're authentic about those. From a personal point of view, vitality is important. You need to ensure that you've got enough energy by exercising, having the correct diet, getting enough sleep, and if necessary, adopting practices like mindfulness as well. We all need support, and having the right support in place will ensure that you boost your own resilience. So this might come from your leaders, your managers, but it might also come from your peers or from other people in your network. In terms of understanding ourselves, composure is also important in terms of building resilience. We are always in control of how we feel, and we can make a choice in terms of how we choose to respond to a particular stimulus. If I'm angry about something, that's because I've chosen to be angry about it. We might think that sometimes this is an involuntary reaction, but by truly understanding your motivators and your triggers, you can actually exercise a much greater degree of self-awareness and self-control. Persistence is another important factor of resilience. So this is about tenacity, optimism, or bounce back ability, for want of a better phrase. They all come into play here. And this is supported by all of the other elements as well. And then I think finally, decision making. So how do you solve problems? How do you take action? How do you move forward? All of these things are key to your success and key to a resilient approach. So it's not a one size fits all. There are certainly some things that as individuals we need to take responsibility for, but actually as business owners and business leaders, there are certain elements that we can also support and put in place for our people. On a practical level, if you do a Google search, you'll probably find that this is quite an overwhelming space to look at. So in August 2020, would you believe there were 71,000 new health and fitness apps launched? And as of August 21, there were 350,000 digital health apps available worldwide. So choosing the right tool is like finding a needle in a haystack. And of course, this is assuming you know which needle you're actually looking for. So I've just put 3 options on the screen there for you, which are some wellbeing tools and services that we've come across and we think are really good. So you've got My Internal World. This is an emotional wellbeing assessment that provides you with a detailed report with your personal insights, along with some guidance and support in figuring out what your next steps might be. White Calm, this is an employee wellness platform, so this covers all aspects of a person's well-being, including their mental and physical health, and it's got a vast amount of resources on there, from live and recorded exercise classes to Q&A sessions and informative videos, etc. And then finally, you've got another wellbeing app called What About Me? So this contains wellbeing workouts. There's short attention-grabbing videos offering practical guidance on here, with ideas and opportunities for proactive and also restorative improvements in wellbeing. So, yeah, you know, just put those up there really as some suggestions, and hopefully to shortcut some of the research that you might need to undertake if you're going to actually start looking for some services that might help you in your organisation. So tip number 9, this is to review and update your contracts and policies. You know, I think with so much change happening at such pace, it's really important, and it's always good practice to review your contracts and policies to ensure they meet the needs of your organisation. So what might need changing in your contract? Well, you might need to review whether you've got furlough or layoff and short-time working clauses in there, for example. Depending on your sector and your organisation's approach, there may need to be some updates around testing and vaccinations. Depending on your response to the hybrid working tip, you may actually need to update the contracts in terms of an individual's work base, and that may also have a knock-on impact in terms of working pattern shifts or shift payments and shift allowances, etc. But from a policy point of view, you may also find that you've got some gaps based on what's changed. So, you know, things to look at are, for example, your social media policies, you know, particularly reminding people what they should and shouldn't be using social media for from a business point of view. Think about your IT and data security policies, particularly if you've got more people working from home. And of course, the health and safety policies, things like lone working, display screen equipment, assessments, etc., will be, again, really important things for you to think at. So again, take a look at what's changed and do that gap analysis just to see if anything needs updating. And finally, my top tip number 10, which is, as it says there on the screen, keep an open mind and view your organisation through other people's lenses, not just your own. So think about all the stakeholders who have an influence in your business, and how does what you're intending to do look from their perspective? You know, whether that's current or potential employees, whether it's your shareholders, clients, customers, your supply chain, you know, they will all have a relevant and yet different perspective on your business. And I think doing this really helps you to innovate, helps you to remove barriers, be more inclusive and more appealing to a wider audience. But above all, it helps you to get a much more robust approach in place. So here they are, my top tips for autumn-winter 2021. I hope you found some of that interesting and found some useful tips in there to help you stay ahead of the game and hopefully prevent people problems in your organisation. As you will have heard, lots of these are interrelated, but even if you don't or can't attempt to do all of these things, picking out just 2 or 3 and doing them really well and really consistently will have a majorly positive impact on your organisation. So finally, just a request and an opportunity here for you to keep in touch. Do follow us on social media. Check out our HR resources on the website. If you need advice, we are offering a free monthly HR hour session where you can book a 15-minute no obligation slot for a chat to talk through any of your issues. And again, please sign up to our newsletter so you don't miss out on anything. We're going to continue our webinar series into 2022. So by signing up to the newsletter, you'll get to hear when those future dates are happening. So my contact details are there. If you would like to get in touch after the webinar, please either give me a call, drop me an email, or contact me via one of our social media platforms. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found that useful.